The apex station floated in the exact center of the galaxy. It was massive, larger than most planets, and it sparkled like a jewel against the darkness of space. Every 10 years, the three most powerful species in the galaxy met here. Today was that day. High Chancellor Vexthor stepped off his warship onto the station's main platform. He was a Kralix, standing nearly 8 feet tall with armored scales that gleamed dark red. His forearms carried ceremonial weapons and his eyes glowed with fierce pride. Behind him marched 50 of his finest warriors, their boots making perfect synchronized sounds against the metal floor. The Kralix Empire controlled more military power than any other species in the galaxy. Everyone knew it, and Vexthor made sure they never forgot it. On the opposite side of the station, Prime Intellect Zara arrived in a ship that made no sound at all. She was a Zenith, her body thin and elegant, her skin shimmering with a faint blue light. The Zenith Collective did not believe in showing off with weapons or warriors. They believed in the power of the mind and technology. Zara's brain could process information faster than most computers, and her species had invented technologies that seemed like magic to other races. She looked at Vexthor's display of military force and allowed herself a small smile. How primitive, she thought. The third arrival came in a ship covered in gold and precious metals. Trade Sovereign Mulak emerged, his wide body decorated with jewels and expensive fabrics. The Voral were masters of money and trade. They owned the most valuable trade routes in the galaxy, controlled the flow of resources between thousands of worlds, and could make or break entire planetary economies with a single decision. Mulak's 6 eyes scanned the station, calculating the value of everything he saw. He nodded to both Vexthor and Zara. In his mind, he was already richer than both of them combined. The three leaders walked toward the meeting hall, each surrounded by their advisors and assistants. The hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high it seemed to disappear into darkness. A round table sat in the center, perfectly sized so that no one could claim the head position. This was neutral ground. No one species was above the others here, at least officially. "Welcome, honored leaders," said a voice from the shadows. A small figure stepped forward. She was human, wearing a simple gray suit with no decorations. Her name was Rachel Chen, and she was Earth's ambassador to the galactic community. She carried a datapad and smiled politely. "Please take your seats. The summit will begin shortly." Vexthor barely glanced at her. The Kralix considered humans to be average at best. They had no great military might, no empire spanning hundreds of systems. They were just another mid-tier species among thousands. Zara gave Rachel a brief nod. The Zenith had worked with humans on some scientific projects. They were creative, she would admit, but not particularly remarkable in intelligence or innovation. Mulak ignored Rachel entirely. Humans had small economies compared to the Voral. They were traders, yes, but minor ones, not worth his attention. Rachel Chen simply smiled and walked to a seat far from the main table in the observer section. She opened her datapad and began taking notes. The summit began with the usual ceremonies. Each leader spoke about their civilization's achievements over the past 10 years. Vexthor boasted about conquering 3 new systems and crushing a rebellion in the Outer Rim. Zara presented data about technological breakthroughs that would revolutionize space travel. Mulak displayed graphs showing the Voral's increased wealth and control over rare resources. Hours passed with speeches and presentations. Then came the discussions about trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and resource sharing. This was where the real work happened. This was where the three powers carefully negotiated to maintain the balance of power that kept the galaxy from falling into total war. A minor issue came up. In the outer spiral, 2 small species had been fighting over a mining colony. The war had disrupted trade routes and caused problems for all 3 major powers. Vexthor had wanted to send his military to end the conflict by force. Zara had suggested using technology to mediate. Mulak had considered economic sanctions. "The conflict has been resolved," announced one of Mulak's trade advisors, a nervous-looking alien with too many tentacles. A human colony in that sector brokered a peace agreement 3 weeks ago. Both sides have signed a treaty and agreed to share the mining rights. Vexthor frowned. "Humans? I don't remember authorizing human involvement." "Nor did we," Zara said, her analytical mind suddenly alert. "That region falls within our technological development zone." "We should have been consulted." Mulak waved a jeweled hand dismissively. "The humans run several trading posts in that area. They probably just wanted to protect their investments." It doesn't matter. The problem is solved. But something bothered Zara. Her mind worked quickly, pulling up information from her memory banks. Curious, she said slowly. I just recalled that we recently hired human consultants for our quantum research division. We have human tactical advisors in our military academy, Vexthor added, surprise in his voice. I approved it myself 2 years ago. They came highly recommended. Human trade liaisons manage several of our key shipping routes, Mulak said, his multiple eyes narrowing. When did that happen? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Rachel Chen, in her observer seat, continued typing on her datapad, her expression unchanged. The summit continued through the afternoon. Discussions moved to other topics: border disputes, technology sharing agreements, resource allocation. But now all three leaders were distracted. Each time a problem was mentioned, they noticed something strange. When the Kralix talked about a successful diplomatic mission, it turned out human translators had been present. When the Zenith described a breakthrough in artificial intelligence, human programmers had been on the team. When the Voral explained how they had stabilized a financial crisis on a remote world, human economic advisors had been involved. Vexthor's head of intelligence, a scarred veteran named Crix, leaned close to whisper in his chancellor's ear. My lord, I've been reviewing our records. Humans appear in the background of many significant events. They never lead, never take command positions, but they are always there. Zara was having similar thoughts. Her perfect memory was now searching through decades of data. Humans at scientific conferences, humans in research teams, humans in technology development programs, always in supporting roles, always contributing ideas, never demanding recognition. Mulak pulled up financial records on his personal device. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the data. Human trade facilitators, human contract negotiators, human market analysts, they were everywhere in his economic network, working in middle management positions, connecting different parts of his vast commercial empire. How had he never noticed this before? The evening session ended with ceremonial formalities. There was a dinner planned, a grand affair where the three powers would eat expensive food and pretend to be friends. Rachel Chen politely declined her invitation. Thank you, but I have administrative duties to attend to, she said with a smile. Please enjoy your evening. She left the hall quietly, her footsteps barely making a sound. After she was gone, Vexthor stood from his seat. His warriors immediately snapped to attention. I am retiring to my ship, he announced. I have matters to consider. Zara and Mulak both made similar excuses. Within minutes, the grand dining hall sat empty except for confused servants who had prepared a feast that no one would eat. On his warship, Vexthor called an emergency meeting with his top intelligence officers. I want a full investigation, he commanded. Find out everything about human involvement in our military operations. I want to know where they are, what they do, and why we hired them. I want this report in 3 days. Across the station in her sleek vessel, Zara was giving identical orders to her research team. Analyze all collaborative projects involving humans for the past 50 years. Look for patterns. Calculate their actual contribution to our technological advancement. Use every analytical tool we have. On his golden ship, Mulak gathered his best economic strategists. Map out every human connection in our trade network, he ordered. I want to see the complete picture, and do it quietly. I don't want the Kralix or the Zenith to know we're investigating. None of them shared their concerns with the others. Each leader believed they had discovered something important, something that might give them an advantage over their rivals. Each was convinced that humans had somehow infiltrated their civilization specifically. None of them realized that the other two were conducting the exact same investigation. In her small quarters on Apex Station, Rachel Chen sat at her desk. She had changed out of her formal suit and now wore comfortable clothes. A cup of tea steamed beside her datapad. She reviewed the notes from today's summit and allowed herself a small smile. They're starting to notice, she said quietly to herself. Her datapad chimed. A message appeared. Summit observations logged. Pattern recognition appears to be accelerating among primary actors. Recommend standard protocol. Continue normal operations, maintain low profile, prepare for inquiry phase. Rachel typed a quick response. Agreed. Inform the network. They'll have questions soon. Make sure everyone is ready to answer honestly. She sent the message and took a sip of her tea. Through her window, she could see the three massive flagships of the galaxy's greatest powers. They looked so impressive, so powerful, covered in weapons and shields and technology. But Rachel knew something they were just beginning to suspect. Power wasn't about who had the biggest ships or the smartest scientists or the most money. Real power was about who made things work. Real power lived in the connections between things, in the people who solved problems before they became crises, in the quiet competence that kept civilization running smoothly. The three leaders out there commanded billions of people. They made grand decisions and gave mighty speeches. They appeared on broadcasts across the galaxy, their faces famous on 10,000 worlds. But who actually implemented those decisions? Who turned grand strategies into working systems? Who fixed the problems that arose when theory met reality? Rachel looked at her reflection in the dark window. Just an average human in an average room, doing average administrative work. She smiled again. Tomorrow would be very interesting indeed. Outside, stars wheeled slowly in their ancient dance. The galaxy turned on its axis, vast and beautiful and complex beyond measure. And in a small office in a neutral station, a human woman drank her tea and prepared for the moment when the mightiest species in the galaxy would finally ask the right questions. They were starting to see the pattern. Soon they would see the truth. And once they did, nothing would ever be quite the same. 3 days after the summit, Vex Thor sat in his war room aboard the flagship Crimson Blade. The room was dark except for holographic displays that floated in the air, showing charts and data and images. His intelligence chief, Crix, stood before him with a data crystal in his clawed hand. "My lord," Crix said, his voice careful and quiet, "you should see this yourself." Vex Thor took the crystal and inserted it into his command throne. Images began to play. Battle scenes from 50 years ago. The great victory at Mordak 7, where Kralix forces had crushed a rebellion that threatened to split the Empire. It was considered one of the greatest military achievements in their history. But in the corner of one image, barely visible, stood a human in a research division uniform. The image enhanced. The human was pointing at a tactical display, showing something to a Kralix general. "That's Dr. James Morrison," Crix explained. "He was listed as a historical consultant in the military records. He came from Earth to study our military tactics for an academic paper." More images appeared. Different battles. Different campaigns. And in almost every one, somewhere in the background there was a human, not commanding, not leading troops, just advising, suggesting, contributing small ideas. "Find me this Morrison," Vex Thor commanded. "Dead, my lord. 30 years ago. Natural causes, then find me the others." Crix brought up more data. "We found 47 humans currently working in various military positions across the Empire. All in research, advisory, or educational roles. None in command. We interviewed several of them. A recording played. A young human woman with dark hair smiled at the camera. "Oh yes, I teach strategy classes at the academy," she said cheerfully. "It's fascinating work. The Kralix have such a rich military history. I just help organize the lessons and sometimes suggest different approaches to problems. The generals make all the real decisions, of course." The recording switched to another human, an older man with gray hair. "Battle formations? Well, I did write a paper about optimizing communication networks during combat. The admirals found it useful, I suppose. They adapted some of my suggestions into standard procedures. I was honored they even read it." Vex Thor watched recording after recording. Every human said similar things. They were just helpers, just teachers, just researchers. They suggested ideas but never demanded credit. They worked in the background, improving systems bit by bit. "Show me the Mordak 7 strategy," Vex Thor ordered. The battle plan appeared in the air. It was brilliant, a masterpiece of military thinking. It had been credited to General Thrax, one of the greatest military minds in Kralix history. "Now show me Dr. Morrison's suggestions from the archives." Crix pulled up a dusty old file. Vex Thor read it. His blood ran cold. The battle plan wasn't exactly the same as Morrison's paper, but the core ideas were there. The key strategies. The crucial timing. Morrison had written it all down as theoretical possibilities in an academic research paper 2 months before the battle. General Thrax read this paper, Crix confirmed. It's in his personal library records. But Thrax was a genius, Vex Thor protested. "He earned his victories." "Yes, my lord. He was brilliant. And he was smart enough to use good ideas no matter where they came from. Vex Thor stood from his throne, his forearms clenched into fists. How many of our victories had human input? Crix's face looked pained. According to our investigation, approximately 68% of major military operations in the last century had humans somewhere in the planning or support structure. The mighty Chancellor sat back down heavily. Across the galaxy, on the zenith homeworld of Lumina, Prime Intellect Zara reviewed similar findings. Her research team had worked without rest, analyzing data with the cold precision that defined their species. The results troubled her. The quantum cascade processor, her lead scientist said, gesturing at a holographic model of one of their greatest inventions. It revolutionized our computing power 20 years ago. Dr. Susan Park received the Nobel Prize equivalent in our scientific community for this. I remember, Zara said. Dr. Park is Zenith. Yes, but look at this. The scientist pulled up research notes. 3 years before Dr. Park's breakthrough, a human graduate student named Kevin Chen was working in the same lab. He wrote a series of equations in a report about quantum entanglement. The equations were marked as incomplete and theoretical curiosity only. The scientist overlaid Chen's equations onto Park's famous solution. They fit together perfectly. Chen had written the foundation. Park had built the building. Where's Kevin Chen now? Zara asked. He finished his graduate program and took a position teaching mathematics at a colony university. When we contacted him, he said he was happy Dr. Park had made his rough ideas work. He seemed genuinely pleased. More examples followed. The gravity stabilizers that made Zenith ships faster than any other? A human engineer had suggested a small modification to the original design. The artificial intelligence that managed their research databases? Human programmers had contributed to the learning algorithms. The medical breakthroughs that extended Zenith lifespans. Human doctors had worked alongside Zenith physicians, offering insights from Earth's biological research. They don't take credit, Zara said slowly. They contribute ideas and then move on to other projects. Yes, prime intellect. It's as if they seek the act of discovery itself, not the recognition. Zara's analytical mind raced through the implications. Humans were not as intelligent as Zenith in pure processing power. Their technology was inferior, but they had something else. They could look at problems from different angles. They made intuitive leaps that Zenith logic sometimes missed. And they shared these insights freely, asking for nothing in return except the opportunity to work on interesting problems. How many of our technological advances involved human participation? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Conservative estimate 45%. If we include indirect contributions, ideas that influenced other ideas possibly as high as 70%. Zara closed her eyes. The Zenith prided themselves on intellectual superiority. They believed they were the smartest species in the galaxy. But apparently, they had been building on a foundation that humans had helped create. On the Voral homeworld of Pluteris, trade sovereign Mulak stared at financial charts that painted an equally disturbing picture. His economic strategists had mapped out the entire trade network, and what they found made his 6 eyes widen in shock. The Meridian trade route, his chief strategist explained, pointing to a glowing line on the holographic map. It's our most profitable shipping lane. It connects 17 major economic centers and generates 20% of our annual revenue. I know this, Mulak said impatiently. I personally negotiated the treaties that created it. Yes, Sovereign. But look at who actually manages the day-to-day operations. The view zoomed in. Each station along the route, each customs office, each shipping coordinator was marked with a dot. The dots were color-coded by species. 58% were blue. Human. They're just clerks and administrators, Mulak protested. Low-level positions. Are they? The strategist pulled up more data. This is Station 47, halfway along the route. The official manager is Voral. But every single significant decision over the past 5 years was implemented by the assistant manager, a human named Maria Santos. She handles conflicts between shipping companies, resolves customs disputes, and coordinates with both sides of each transaction. Then she's just good at her job. Yes, extremely good. So good that when she took a vacation last year, station efficiency dropped 37% in 1 week. The official manager begged her to come back early. More examples followed. Humans working as trade facilitators, who somehow always found ways to make deals work when negotiations stalled. Humans serving as market analysts, whose predictions were uncannily accurate. Humans employed as cultural liaisons, who helped different species understand each other's business practices. They connect things, Mulak said, finally understanding. They see the whole system, not just individual parts. Exactly, Sovereign. And they're in every major economic system we operate. Banking, shipping, manufacturing, resource extraction, retail trade. Everywhere. Mulak felt dizzy. The Vorel had built the largest commercial empire in galactic history. They were masters of economics. But when he looked at the network map with human positions highlighted, he saw something that terrified him. If all the humans stopped working at the same time, the entire network would collapse within days. They weren't in control. They didn't make the big decisions. But they were the connections that held everything together. Remove them, and the system would fall apart. Are they doing this deliberately? He asked quietly. We don't know, Sovereign. When we interview them, they just say they're doing their jobs. They seem genuinely humble about their roles. That night, all three leaders barely slept. Each was troubled by what they had learned. Each wondered what it meant, and each decided they needed to know more. Vexthor ordered deeper investigations. He wanted to know the full scope of human involvement in Krallick's affairs. He assigned his best intelligence agents to dig into history, to find every connection, every collaboration, every place where humans had influenced his empire. Zara initiated a comprehensive analysis using the Zenith's most powerful computing systems. She wanted data on human behavioral patterns, psychological profiles, and strategic capabilities. She wanted to understand how a species with average intelligence could have such a significant impact. Mulak hired private investigators and used his commercial intelligence network to map out every human business connection across the galaxy. He wanted to see the complete economic picture, to understand just how deeply humans were embedded in the galactic economy. None of them told the others what they were doing. Each kept their investigation secret, fearing that showing concern about humans would make them look weak. But as the investigations deepened, all three made the same disturbing discovery. This wasn't new. Humans hadn't recently infiltrated their civilizations. They had been there for centuries. The first humans to leave Earth had been cautious, humble, overwhelmed by the vast galaxy full of species more advanced than they were. So they had learned, they had studied, they had asked questions, they had listened, and slowly, patiently, they had made themselves useful, not as leaders, not as conquerors, but as helpers, teachers, facilitators, and problem solvers. They took jobs that others didn't want. They did work that seemed boring or unimportant. They connected people who needed to work together. They spotted problems before they became crises. They suggested solutions and then let others take credit. Generation after generation of humans had done this. And nobody had noticed because nobody was looking at the support staff, the middle managers, the advisors and consultants and coordinators. Vexthor found records of humans serving in the Krallick's military, going back 300 years. Always in research or education. Never commanding troops, but always making the troops more effective. Zara discovered human scientists in Zenith research programs dating back to first contact. They published papers, contributed to projects, and trained new researchers. Then, they would quietly move to another project, leaving their collaborators better equipped to continue the work. Mulak traced human merchants and traders throughout the entire history of modern galactic commerce. They were the middlemen, the facilitators, the ones who made deals happen. They charged fair prices and built reputations for reliability. 3 days became a week. The investigations continued. And then something happened that made all three leaders forget their secret research. An emergency alert flashed across all communication networks. A sector of space in the outer territories was experiencing massive refugee movement. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were fleeing their homes. The reason wasn't clear yet, but whatever was happening, it was big. Vexthor immediately began mobilizing military resources to investigate. Zara dispatched science vessels to scan for anomalies. Mulak started organizing humanitarian aid shipments. But as they watched the sensor data come in, they noticed something strange. Human civilian ships were already there. Dozens of them. They were evacuating refugees with remarkable efficiency, moving people off endangered planets before the major powers had even finished their planning meetings. How did they know? Vexthor demanded, staring at his tactical display. We just found out about this crisis 10 minutes ago. How do humans already have ships in position? His intelligence chief had no answer. Across the galaxy, 3 mighty leaders looked at the same data and thought the same thought. What else did the humans know that they didn't? The emergency war room at Apex Station filled quickly. Vexthor arrived first, his warship having been closest to the neutral meeting ground. He paced the floor like a caged predator, his forearms crossed in agitation. Within the hour, Zara's silent vessel docked, followed shortly by Mulak's golden cruiser. The 3 leaders stood around the central tactical display, watching as the crisis in the outer sector unfolded in real time. Red warnings flashed across the screen. A massive anomaly had appeared in space, something the sensors couldn't identify. Planets were being evacuated. Millions of people were in danger. My military forces are 3 days away, Vexthor growled. We're assembling a battle fleet, but we don't even know what we're fighting yet. My science vessels are analyzing the anomaly from a safe distance, Zara reported. Initial data suggests some kind of spatial distortion, possibly a rift in space-time itself. We need more time to understand it. My trade ships are carrying emergency supplies, Mulak added. But coordinating an evacuation of this scale requires weeks of planning. The refugee situation is already overwhelming the nearby systems. They all looked at the display again. Human ships continued their work, moving smoothly between endangered planets and safe zones. The evacuation appeared organized, efficient, almost as if it had been planned in advance. Enough of this, Vexthor said suddenly. He turned to face the other 2 leaders. We need to talk about the humans. Zara's eyes narrowed. What about them? Don't pretend you haven't noticed, Vexthor snapped. They're everywhere. In everything. I've been investigating their involvement in my empire for the past week. Mulak's 6 eyes widened. You've been investigating them too? Zara's expression remained neutral, but her voice was cold. As have I. I was going to bring this matter up after the current crisis was resolved. The 3 leaders stared at each other. Then slowly they began to laugh. Not happy laughter, but the bitter sound of powerful beings who had all been thinking the same thing. Show me what you found, Vexthor commanded. They spent the next hour comparing their research. Vexthor displayed his military findings, centuries of human advisors, teachers, and researchers influencing Kralix's tactics and strategy. Zara presented her scientific data, human contributions to nearly half of all major technological breakthroughs. Mulak revealed his economic maps, the vast network of human facilitators, coordinators, and middlemen holding the galactic economy together. As the 3 of them reviewed the combined data, a picture emerged that was both impressive and frightening. Humans were everywhere, not in leadership positions, not in command roles, but in the infrastructure, in the support systems, in the connections between things. They were the teachers training the next generation. They were the researchers suggesting new ideas. They were the administrators making sure systems ran smoothly. They were the diplomats helping different species understand each other. This is a conspiracy, Vexthor said darkly. They've infiltrated every major civilization in the galaxy. But to what end? Zara asked. They don't seek power. They don't demand territory or resources. They just work, and then they move on to other jobs. Maybe that's the strategy, Mulak suggested. Make themselves indispensable. Then when the time is right, they leverage that position to take control. Vexthor slammed a fist on the table. We should have seen this coming. We should have been monitoring them more carefully. We were arrogant, Zara admitted quietly. We saw them as inferior, average, not worth our attention. And that's exactly what they wanted us to think, Mulak finished. They stood in silence for a moment, each processing the implications. Then Vexthor straightened his spine. Summon the human ambassador. We demand answers. Rachel Chen arrived within 30 minutes. She walked into the war room calmly, carrying only her datapad. She looked at the 3 most powerful beings in the galaxy and smiled politely. You wanted to see me? Sit, Vexthor commanded, gesturing to a chair. Rachel sat. She placed her datapad on the table and folded her hands in her lap. She looked completely relaxed. We know what you've been doing, Vexthor began. We know about your people working in our civilizations. We know about your influence on our military, our technology, our economy. Yes, Rachel said simply. The three leaders blinked. They had expected denials, excuses, explanations. Not immediate confirmation, yes? Mulak repeated. That's all you have to say? You asked me to confirm what you already know. I confirmed it. Was there something else you wanted to ask? Zara leaned forward. Why? What is the purpose of infiltrating every major civilization? Rachel tilted her head. Infiltrating? That's an interesting word choice. We prefer to think of it as participating. Participating. Vexthor's voice rose. You've manipulated us for centuries. Have we? Rachel asked calmly. Tell me, High Chancellor, did any human ever give you an order? Did any human ever force your generals to use particular tactics? Well, no, but, and Prime Intellect Zara, did any human ever steal your research? Did any human ever take credit for your discoveries? No, Zara admitted. But they influenced. And trade sovereign Mulak. Did any human ever control your trade routes? Did any human ever demand ownership of your businesses? Mulak's jeweled fingers tapped on the table. No, but they're embedded in our systems. They're in positions where they can observe everything. Yes, Rachel agreed. We observe, we learn, we participate. And when we see ways to help, we offer suggestions. That's not manipulation. That's collaboration. But why? Zara insisted. What do you gain from this? Rachel was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Let me tell you a story. About 500 years ago on Earth, humans had something we called the World Wars. We nearly destroyed ourselves. Billions died. Our planet was devastated. And after it was all over, we asked ourselves, why did this happen? She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We realized something. The people in charge, the kings, the presidents, the generals, they got all the attention. Everyone watched them. Everyone praised them when things went well and blamed them when things went wrong. And because they were in the spotlight, they had to act tough. They had to show strength. They couldn't appear weak, couldn't admit mistakes, couldn't back down even when backing down was the smart choice. Pride, Mulak said quietly. Yes, pride. The pride that comes with power and recognition. It killed millions of us. Rachel turned back to face them. So we learned something important. The person everyone is watching is not the person with real power. The person doing the actual work, solving the actual problems, making things actually function, that person has the real power. But as long as nobody's watching them, they don't need to prove anything. They can just do what's right. Vexthor stood up, his scales bristling. You're saying you deliberately stay in the background? We learned from our mistakes, Rachel said. When we joined the galactic community, we saw the same patterns. The mighty Kraleks always needing to prove their military strength. The brilliant Zenith always needing to demonstrate their intellectual superiority. The wealthy Voral always needing to show off their economic power. And we thought, what if we just helped? What if we didn't compete for the spotlight? What if we just made things work better? She walked back to the table and picked up her datapad. With a few taps, she brought up a new display. It showed a map of the galaxy, but this one was different. It highlighted not territories or military positions or trade routes. It showed connections, communication networks, coordination systems, information flows. And threading through all of it, like nerves in a body, were human-operated nodes. This is the Galactic Coordination Network, Rachel explained. It's unofficial. No government runs it. We just maintain it. We track conflicts before they become wars. We notice technological developments that could help solve problems. We watch economic trends and warn people when crashes are coming. We connect people who need to work together. We translate not just languages, but cultures. We make the galaxy work. Zara stared at the display, her analytical mind processing the implications. You've built a parallel system. A shadow government. No, Rachel corrected gently. A support system. We don't govern anyone. We don't make decisions for anyone. We just provide the infrastructure that lets everyone else govern themselves more effectively. But you have power, Mulak protested. Enormous power. The power to influence everything. Yes, Rachel agreed. But power used responsibly doesn't look like power. It looks like service. Vexthor was breathing heavily, trying to control his anger and confusion. And what happens if we decide we don't want your help anymore? What if we order all humans to leave our territories? Rachel met his gaze without flinching. Then we leave. We've never forced our presence on anyone. If you want us gone, we'll go. But ask yourself, who runs your intelligence services? Who maintains your computer networks? Who trains your negotiators? Who manages the thousands of small details that keep your empire running smoothly? The war room fell silent. All three leaders knew the answer. You're threatening us, Vexthor said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm stating facts, Rachel replied. You can operate without us. You did before we arrived. But it will be harder, less efficient, more prone to problems. Because over the centuries, we've become part of the infrastructure, not because we forced our way in, but because you invited us, because we were useful, because we made things better. Zara stood up and walked to the display, studying the network. This crisis in the outer sector. The spatial anomaly. You knew about it before we did. We have monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, Rachel confirmed. We watch for threats. When we saw the anomaly forming, we alerted nearby colonies and started evacuating civilians. We sent you the emergency notification as soon as we confirmed it was serious. You should have told us sooner, Mulak accused. We told you the moment we were certain. If we had raised an alarm earlier, based on incomplete data, you would have wasted resources responding to a false threat. We've learned that leaders don't appreciate being interrupted unless the danger is real. Vexthor laughed bitterly. So you filter information for us. You decide what we need to know. We provide information when it's relevant and verified, Rachel corrected, just like your own intelligence services do. The difference is we operate across all boundaries. We see the whole picture. And that doesn't strike you as dangerous? Zara asked. That much power concentrated in one species? Rachel shook her head. It's not concentrated. It's distributed. Millions of humans across thousands of worlds, each doing their small part. No central control. No master plan. Just people trying to be useful. Just people who learned that the best way to prevent war is to make sure everyone has someone to talk to. The best way to advance science is to share knowledge freely. The best way to build prosperity is to help everyone succeed. She looked at each of them in turn. You asked why we do this. The answer is simple. Because someone needs to. Because the galaxy is too big and too complex for any single species to manage alone. Because when we work together, we all benefit. And because we learned the hard way that being in charge is less important than making sure things actually work. The three leaders looked at each other. None of them knew what to say. Finally, Mulak spoke. What you're describing, it's not sustainable. What happens when your interests conflict with ours? What happens when you decide you want more than support roles? Rachel smiled sadly. We've been doing this for 500 years. If we wanted to rule, we would have tried by now. But we saw what ruling did to us. We saw what power and pride and spotlight did to our ancestors. We chose a different path. The path of servants? Vexthor asked with disdain. The path of engineers, Rachel corrected. We maintain the machine. We keep it running. And we take pride in doing it well, even when nobody notices, especially when nobody notices. She picked up her datapad and prepared to leave. I've answered your questions honestly. Now you have a choice to make. Do you want us to continue helping? Or should we withdraw and let you handle things yourselves? Either way, we'll respect your decision. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. But I suggest you decide quickly. That spatial anomaly is growing. Millions of lives are at risk. And coordinating a response across 3 different civilizations with 3 different chains of command is going to be very difficult without people like us in the middle, translating and coordinating and making sure everyone's working together instead of against each other. Rachel Chen left the war room. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. The 3 most powerful beings in the galaxy stood in silence, staring at the display showing the spatial crisis. And each of them realized something uncomfortable. They needed to respond to this threat. They needed to coordinate. They needed to work together. And they had no idea how to do that without the humans they had always taken for granted. After Rachel left, the 3 leaders stood in uncomfortable silence. The tactical display continued to show the growing spatial anomaly, red warnings pulsing like a heartbeat. Millions of civilians needed evacuation. A response was required immediately. We don't need them, Vexthor said finally. We are the three greatest civilizations in the galaxy. We can handle one spatial anomaly without human assistance. Zara nodded slowly. Agreed. It would be unwise to show dependence on a species we now know has been operating behind the scenes. We should demonstrate our independence. Mulak's 6 eyes gleamed with determination. Yes, let us show them that we built our civilizations ourselves. That we don't need their coordination networks and their quiet influence. We are perfectly capable of working together. It was decided. All 3 leaders issued orders to their respective governments. All human consultants, advisors, coordinators, and support staff were to be placed on immediate administrative leave. Not fired, they were careful about that, but removed from active duty. The 3 civilizations would handle the current crisis using only their own people. The order went out across the galaxy within hours. Humans received polite notifications that their services were temporarily not required. They should return to their quarters and await further instructions. To the surprise of many, the humans complied without protest. They simply packed their belongings, logged out of their systems, and left their positions. Some sent brief handover notes to their replacements. Most just quietly departed. Rachel Chen released a public statement. We understand the concerns of the galactic leadership. We respect their right to govern without external assistance. All human personnel have been instructed to withdraw from active roles in Kralix, Zenith, and Voral operations. We wish them success in resolving the current crisis. The statement was professional, polite, and completely non-threatening. Somehow, that made it worse. But the 3 leaders pushed aside their doubts. They had a crisis to manage. Time to prove they could do it themselves. The first problem appeared within 6 hours. Vexthor's military command tried to coordinate their fleet response to the anomaly. But the tactical network, which usually ran smoothly, was responding slowly. Commands took longer to transmit. Battle formations were messy. Ships reported to the wrong positions. What's happening? Vexthor demanded. His technical officer, a nervous young Kralix, checked his displays. My lord, the human technicians who maintained our communications protocols are gone. The system still works, but it's not optimized. There are bugs we didn't know about because they were fixing them before we noticed. Then fix them now. We're trying, my lord. But the documentation is incomplete. The humans apparently kept a lot of the minor patches and updates in informal notes. Notes we don't have access to. Vexthor growled in frustration but ordered his people to work through it. The Kralix were warriors. They would adapt. Meanwhile, Zara faced a different problem. Her science teams were trying to analyze the spatial anomaly, but their research databases were malfunctioning. Queries that should take seconds were taking hours. Data that should be organized was scattered. The humans managed these systems, her lead technician explained. They built custom search algorithms and maintained the indexing structure. Without them, we're using the default systems, which are less efficient. How much less efficient? Perhaps 70% slower, Prime Intellect. 70%. On a problem where every hour mattered, where millions of lives hung in the balance. Zara felt something she rarely experienced. Frustration. Do what you can, she ordered. Mulak's problems were even more immediate. His economic network was experiencing cascading failures. Trade routes were getting congested. Shipments were being delayed. Customs offices couldn't process the emergency supply runs efficiently. The human facilitators handled conflicts between different trade groups, his chief strategist explained. Without them, everyone's following their own procedures, and the procedures don't match. Ships are sitting at checkpoints arguing about paperwork while refugees need supplies. Then bypass the bureaucracy, Mulak shouted. We're trying, Sovereign. But the humans were the ones who knew which rules could be bent and which ones were critical. They understood the informal systems that made everything work. The crisis deepened. The spatial anomaly was growing faster than predicted. More planets needed evacuation. The 3 civilizations scrambled to respond, but their efforts were uncoordinated and chaotic. Vexthor's military fleet finally arrived at the crisis zone, but couldn't establish proper communication with Zara's science vessels. The protocols didn't match. The command structures were different. Without human translators and coordinators, the 2 groups struggled to share information. Zara's scientists made a breakthrough in understanding the anomaly, but distributing that information to all the relevant parties took too long. The humans had maintained communication channels between different organizations. Without them, everything had to go through official channels, which were slow and bureaucratic. Mulak's supply ships arrived with emergency resources, but coordinating distribution to the refugee camps was a nightmare. Different species had different needs. Different cultures required different approaches. The human liaisons had understood all of this. Without them, well-meaning efforts turned into confusion. 3 days into the crisis, civilian casualties began mounting. Not because the three powers weren't trying, they were working harder than ever, but because their systems weren't designed to work together. They were designed to work independently, with humans serving as the invisible connective tissue. Vexthor's war room became a chaos of shouting officers and conflicting reports. His people were brave and skilled, but they kept running into problems that should have been solved already. Equipment that should have been compatible wasn't. Procedures that should have been clear were ambiguous. Information that should have been shared was trapped in bureaucratic loops. Why is this so difficult? He roared at his staff. We've run military operations for thousands of years. An older general, scarred from many battles, spoke carefully. My lord, we've run operations within our own empire for thousands of years. Working with other civilizations, the humans usually handled the coordination. We never realized how much work it was. Zara's laboratory was equally frustrated. Her scientists were brilliant, but they kept encountering obstacles. Research data from other institutions wasn't in compatible formats. Collaborative projects that humans had maintained were falling apart. Graduate students who humans had been mentoring were lost without guidance. We are the smartest species in the galaxy, Zara said to herself. Why can't we make this work? But she knew the answer. Intelligence wasn't the same as wisdom. Knowledge wasn't the same as experience. The humans had 500 years of practice working across cultural boundaries. The Zenith had spent those same 500 years being brilliant in isolation. Mulak watched his economic network straining under pressure. Supply lines that should have been flexible were rigid. Trade partners who should have cooperated were competing. Resources were available but couldn't get to where they were needed. The humans made this look easy, he muttered. His chief strategist nodded grimly. They made it look invisible, Sovereign. We never saw the work they were doing because they did it so smoothly. By the end of the first week, it was clear that the three civilizations were failing, not because they weren't capable, but because they weren't designed to work together without help. The spatial anomaly continued to grow. More planets were endangered, and the evacuation effort was a slow-motion disaster. Worse, the three powers were starting to blame each other. The Kralix military is blocking our science vessels, Zara complained in a heated communication. The Zenith scientists won't share their data, Vexthor shot back. The Voral are hoarding supplies instead of distributing them. Both accused Mulak. We're trying to distribute them, but your people won't accept our shipping priorities, Mulak defended. The unity they had claimed was crumbling. Ancient rivalries were surfacing. Each civilization was reverting to old patterns. The Kralix trying to solve everything with military force. The Zenith insisting on perfect scientific analysis before action. The Voral calculating costs instead of simply helping. Meanwhile, in human colonies across the galaxy, life continued normally. Human ships had withdrawn from the crisis zone as ordered. Human workers had left their positions. They went about their daily lives, running their own small communities, managing their own affairs. But they watched the news. They saw the growing catastrophe. And in their homes, in their community centers, in their quiet conversations, they felt the weight of what was happening. We should help, one human coordinator said to her colleagues in a small meeting on a frontier colony. We were ordered to stand down, another reminded her. People are dying. They chose to do this without us. We have to respect that choice. Rachel Chen sent a message to all human communities. Stand by. Do not intervene unless specifically asked. They need to understand what we do, and the only way they can understand is to try doing it themselves. But be ready. When they ask for help, and they will, we need to respond immediately. On the 8th day, the spatial anomaly reached critical mass. It began spawning smaller rifts, spreading across multiple systems. The crisis was no longer manageable. It was becoming a catastrophe. The three leaders called an emergency meeting. They looked at each other through their communication screens, and for the first time in their lives, they looked defeated. We're failing, Vexthor admitted. My military is powerful, but we can't protect everyone without better coordination. My scientists understand the anomaly, Zara said quietly. But we can't implement solutions fast enough without better communication systems. My resources are sufficient, Mulak added, but we can't distribute them effectively without better logistics management. They sat in silence, the weight of their pride pressing down on them. Finally, Vexthor spoke. We need to ask for their help. It hurt to say it. It hurt to admit that the mighty Kralix Empire couldn't handle a crisis alone. But watching his people die hurt more. Agreed, Zara said. Her analytical mind had calculated the outcomes. Without human coordination, millions would die. With it, most could be saved. The math was clear. Yes, Mulak confirmed. His 6 eyes were dim with exhaustion. We need them. Vexthor opened a communication channel. Get me Ambassador Chen. Rachel's face appeared on the screen within minutes. She looked tired but alert. Behind her, human coordinators were already working at terminals, ready to mobilize. Ambassador, Vexthor began and then stopped. The word stuck in his throat. He had never asked anyone for help before. He had never admitted weakness. Rachel waited patiently. Vexthor tried again. The situation has deteriorated. We require assistance. We need your help, Zara added more directly. Please. Millions of lives are at stake, Mulak finished. We were wrong to dismiss your contributions. We understand now what you do, and we're asking you to do it again. Rachel Chen looked at the 3 most powerful beings in the galaxy. They had stripped away their pride. They had admitted their limits. They were asking, not demanding. She nodded. We'll help, but first I need you to understand something. When this is over, we need to talk about how things will work going forward. The old way, us working invisibly, you not noticing, that can't continue. You've seen behind the curtain now. We need a new arrangement. Anything, Vexthor said desperately. Just help us save our people. Rachel's expression softened. Then let's get to work. She turned to her terminal and began typing. Within minutes, human coordinators across the galaxy received their assignments. Within hours, the support systems began functioning again. Communication improved. Coordination smoothed out. Resources started flowing to where they were needed. The humans had returned to work, and the galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. Rachel Chen stood in the command center that had been hastily set up on Apex Station. Around her, dozens of human coordinators worked at terminals, their fingers moving quickly across displays. They spoke quietly into communication devices, connecting military commanders with scientists, linking supply officers with refugee coordinators, translating not just words but intentions and needs. The spatial anomaly crisis was entering its final phase. Thanks to Zenith science, they understood what the anomaly was. A dimensional tear caused by an experimental weapon test gone wrong in an abandoned sector. Thanks to Kralix's military power, they had the force necessary to contain it. Thanks to Voral resources, they had the supplies to support the massive operation. But it was the humans who made it all work together. Zenith Vessel Lumina 7, your calculations are ready for transmission, one coordinator said calmly. Sending to Kralix's flagship Crimson Blade now. I've translated the scientific notation into military tactical format for immediate implementation. Voral Supply Convoy Delta. I have refugee camps that need medical supplies urgently. Uploading priorities and routing data. Yes, I've already cleared it with customs. No, you won't have any delays at checkpoints. General Crix, the science team needs your ships to hold position for exactly 47 minutes while they calibrate the containment field. I know it seems like a long time, but Dr. Zara personally confirmed this is critical. Yes, I'll monitor the situation and alert you if anything changes. Rachel watched her people work and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because they were so good at this. Sadness because it had taken a near catastrophe for anyone to notice. Vexthor entered the command center. The mighty Kralix leader looked exhausted, his scales dull from stress. He stopped just inside the door and watched the humans work. After a moment, he approached Rachel. This is what you do, he said quietly. Every day. We just never saw it. You saw the results, Rachel replied without looking away from her display. Smooth operations. Successful collaborations. Problems solved before they became crises. You just thought it happened naturally. Nothing happens naturally, Vexthor said. Everything requires work. We just didn't see who was doing it. On her screen, Rachel tracked the progress of the operation. The Kralix fleet was in position. The Zenith scientists were ready. The countdown began. Implementing containment field in 10 seconds, came Zara's voice over the communication channel. All ships maintain precise positions. This has to be perfect. The humans coordinated the timing across dozens of vessels. Different species counted differently. Different cultures understood precision differently. The human coordinators translated everything into synchronized action. "Mark," Rachel said calmly. The containment field activated. On the displays, the spatial anomaly began to shrink. Slowly at first, then faster. The dimensional tier started to seal. "It's working," someone whispered. Minutes ticked by. The humans continued their work, adjusting positions, managing power distributions, keeping everyone informed. The three civilizations provided the force, but the humans provided the coordination that made the force effective. Finally, after 17 minutes that felt like hours, Zara's voice came through again. "The anomaly is sealed. The dimensional breach is closed. The crisis is over." The command center erupted in quiet celebration. No cheering or shouting. Humans rarely celebrated loudly. Just relieved smiles and tired laughter. They had done it. Millions of lives had been saved. Vexthor watched them and understood something fundamental. These people weren't ambitious. They weren't seeking glory. They were genuinely happy just because the work was done well, because people were safe, because the problem was solved. Over the next 3 days, the massive operation wound down. Refugees were settled in temporary housing. Supply lines were established. Military vessels stood guard to ensure no other anomalies appeared. And throughout it all, humans coordinated every step. On the 4th day after the crisis ended, the three leaders met again at Apex Station. This time Rachel Chen sat at the main table with them. Not in an observer seat. Not in the background. At the table. "We owe you an apology," Zara began. "And more importantly, we owe you recognition. For 500 years, your people have served the galaxy faithfully, and we never acknowledged your contributions." Rachel shook her head. "We didn't ask for recognition. That wasn't the point. But you deserve it," Mulak insisted. "What you do, what your people have always done, it's essential. We understand that now. The question is," Vexthor said, "what happens next? You said we need a new arrangement. Tell us what you want." Rachel took a breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for. "We don't want to rule. We don't want territory or special privileges. But we need protection and recognition for what we do. We need a formal agreement that acknowledges our role in galactic society." She brought up a document on the main display. "We're proposing the Terran Coordination Initiative. It would officially recognize humans as the Galactic Infrastructure Corps. We would continue doing what we've always done: coordination, translation, facilitation, but with official status and legal protections. You would have authority?" Zara asked carefully. "We would have responsibility," Rachel corrected. "Authority belongs to sovereign governments. You make the decisions. We help implement them. But we need the authority to do our jobs effectively. Access to communication networks, freedom of movement, protection from political interference." Vexthor studied the document. "You would serve all civilizations equally? Not just the three of us?" "Everyone who wants our help," Rachel confirmed. "That's always been our approach. We don't take sides. We make the system work for everyone." Mulek's eyes scanned the economic provisions. "You're not asking for payment? We're asking for fair compensation for our work like anyone else. But we're not seeking to control resources or trade routes. We just want to be paid fairly for the services we provide." The three leaders looked at each other. Slowly they nodded. "I agree to this," Vexthor said. "The Kralix Empire recognizes the Terran Coordination Initiative. The Zenith Collective agrees as well," Zara added. "Your proposal is logical and fair." "The Vorul Consortium accepts these terms," Mulak confirmed. Rachel felt tension she didn't know she'd been holding finally release. "Thank you. There's one more thing, though. This arrangement only works if there's transparency. You've seen behind the curtain now. We can't go back to being invisible. You need to explain to your people what we do and why it matters." Vexthor stood up. "I will address the Kralix Empire personally. They will know that their victories were achieved with human support, that our military greatness was built in partnership. I will ensure the Zenith Collective understands that intelligence requires collaboration," Zara promised, "that our scientific achievements were made possible by human creativity and insight. I will make the Voral people aware that our economic success depends on human facilitation, Mulak said. That prosperity requires cooperation, not just competition. Over the following weeks, the agreement was formalized. The Terran Coordination Initiative became official policy across the galaxy. Humans were recognized as the infrastructure specialists, the coordinators, the people who made complex systems work. But more importantly, attitudes began to change. Krallick's military officers started acknowledging the human advisors who helped develop their strategies. Xanath scientists began collaborating openly with human researchers, giving credit where it was due. Voral merchants treated human facilitators as essential partners rather than invisible servants. It wasn't perfect. There were still those who resented human influence. There were conspiracy theories about secret human control. There were calls for the old system where the mighty species didn't have to admit they needed help. But those voices grew quieter over time. 20 years later, the galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The three great powers still competed, but constructively. Wars were rare because humans helped resolve conflicts before they escalated. Technology advanced faster because humans connected researchers across species boundaries. Trade flourished because humans maintained the trust networks that made commerce possible. In a coordination center on a space station in the mid-rim, 3 people sat together working on a project. General Crix, the Krallick's officer who had led part of the anomaly response. Dr. Lin, a Zenith scientist who had helped seal the dimensional breach, and Merchant Vex, a Voral trader who had organized the humanitarian supplies. They were designing a new early warning system to detect spatial anomalies before they became dangerous. It required military monitoring, scientific analysis, and economic resources. 20 years ago, such a collaboration would have been impossible. Now it was routine. A human coordinator, a young woman named Sarah Park, brought them coffee and placed a data pad on the table. Here are the latest projections you asked for. I've compiled input from all 3 civilizations and found some interesting overlaps you might want to explore. Thank you, Sarah, Crix said, his voice respectful. Your insights yesterday about the communication protocols were very helpful. Just doing my job, Sarah replied with a smile. Let me know if you need anything else. She returned to her terminal where she was monitoring 17 different projects across the sector. Trade disputes, research collaborations, military exercises, diplomatic negotiations, all requiring someone to connect the dots, translate between cultures, and keep everything running smoothly. General Crix watched her work for a moment, then chuckled. Do you think she knows how important she is? Dr. Lin smiled. She knows. She just doesn't need everyone else to know. That's the human way, Merchant Vex observed. Power through service, leadership through support, control through connection. They returned to their work, the 3 representatives of the galaxy's greatest civilizations, working together in a coordination center, run by the species that had taught them all a valuable lesson. In another part of the galaxy, Rachel Chen, now retired from active service, taught a class to young human coordinators. They were learning the skills that had made humanity indispensable: cultural translation, system thinking, conflict resolution, and the art of helping others succeed. Remember, she told her students, we're not trying to be heroes. We're not trying to be famous. We're trying to make things work. When you do your job well, nobody notices. That's not a failure, that's success. A young student raised her hand. But doesn't it bother you that we do so much but never get the credit? Rachel smiled. Let me tell you about the spatial anomaly crisis. The galaxy celebrates the scientists who sealed the breach, the generals who commanded the operation, and the merchants who supplied the resources. And that's right. They deserve that recognition. But do you know what I celebrate? The students leaned forward. I celebrate that millions of people are alive today who would have died. I celebrate that 3 civilizations that were rivals learned to work together. I celebrate that the galaxy is a little bit safer, a little bit more connected, a little bit better than it was before. And I celebrate knowing that my people helped make that happen. She paused, looking at each student. You can have the spotlight or you can have impact. You can have fame or you can have purpose. We choose impact. We choose purpose. And we sleep well at night knowing that the work we do, invisible as it may be, makes the galaxy a better place. The students nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in their eyes. So when you go out there, Rachel continued, and someone more powerful than you takes credit for your ideas, Smile and congratulate them. When someone wealthier than you benefits from your coordination, be happy that you helped them succeed. When someone smarter than you builds on your suggestions, be proud that you contributed to their breakthrough. Because at the end of the day, the galaxy doesn't need more people fighting for the spotlight. It needs more people making sure the spotlight actually illuminates something worth seeing. It needs engineers, coordinators, facilitators, and builders. It needs people who care more about results than recognition. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. 500 years ago, our ancestors nearly destroyed themselves fighting over who would be in charge. We learned that lesson. We learned that real power isn't about who gives orders. It's about who makes sure the orders actually work. So go out there and be invisible when you need to be. Be humble always. Be helpful to everyone. Build systems that work. Connect people who need each other. Solve problems before they become crises. And when the history books give credit to someone else, know that you're part of something bigger than any history book can capture. You're part of the infrastructure of civilization itself, and there's no greater honor than that. The class ended. The students filed out, their minds full of new understanding. Rachel stayed at the window watching ships come and go from the station. Each ship represented hundreds or thousands of lives. Each life was part of the great web of galactic civilization, and threading through that web, invisible but essential, were her people. Not conquerors, not rulers, not kings or presidents or generals, just coordinators, just facilitators, just humans doing what humans did best, making things work. In the vast theater of galactic civilization, the mightiest species had finally learned why the humans were never in the spotlight, but always in command. True power wasn't about standing on stage. It was about making sure the stage didn't collapse. It wasn't about the applause. It was about ensuring the show could go on. And in the darkness behind the stage, where all the real work got done, humans smiled quietly and continued their labor, not for glory, not for recognition, but because someone needed to do it. And they had learned long ago that the best way to serve the galaxy was to help everyone else shine while they worked in the shadows, making sure the light never went out.